Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I step off the train from work and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a drizzly Tuesday afternoon here in suburban Chicago. I'm on my way home from the train and trying to keep the microphone sheltered from the wind. It's likely to get a little blustery, but I'll do my best. In the past 2 times I've recorded something, I was recording the first 2 parts of my 3-part discussion of depth versus complexity. So today I'll do the 3rd section, which is games with light complexity, and then I will wrap up the conversation around the time I arrive home. So as I think about games with light complexity, the key here is that they should be easily explained and the rules architecture should be pretty simple to grasp. And then the depth part of it is that those simple sets of rules should, as the games get more deep, allow for more and more robust gameplay. So we'll see how I do on this set of categories. So I'll start with light, a light complexity, light depth game. I have 3 in mind. The 2 basically have the same play set. They just have slightly different mechanisms, and 1 is different. So the 2 light complexity games that I would say are Happy Salmon and Dude. I got a chance to play Dude a couple times this weekend and was really pleased with it. I'd forgotten how good it was as a simple party game. And Happy Salmon basically plays the same way. Both of these games, you are doing something and trying to get other people at the table to match what you're doing, and then you get a point when they match. And your goal is to get through your deck first and have the most points. They're very simple to teach, very simple to play. They're light and fun. A lot of the enjoyment of these games comes from the way you interact with other players, and not so much from depth of strategy or depth of thinking. The main experience with both Dude and Happy Salmon is delight. These are delightful games, super light, super fun, super easy to play. The other game that I would put in this category is Quicks. Quicks is a bit more complex than Happy Salmon or Dude, but still pretty simple. And Quicks is a roll and write game in which the active player rolls 4 colored dice and a white die, and then gets to mark off a couple things on a sheet, and the other players get to mark off the white die on the sheet, get to mark off the white die on the sheet. In terms of teaching, the game takes just a couple minutes to teach. It's pretty easy to play, and there is an interesting amount of choices make. Each turn you're going to get to choose whether to use a die or not, if you can. And when it's your turn, you got to choose to use 2 dice, or just 1, or take a penalty if you're unable to use either of them. But within those choices there's a few things to decide. That said, it really does just take a minute or 2 to teach, and it's pretty simple even with those choices, which would lead me to think it's still in the light category. So that's Quicks, a roll and write that still holds up even with all of these other more robust roll and writes populating the board game landscape. All right, on to the light complexity, medium depth. So again, if light complexity has to do with teaching the rules, the 2 games that have made their way into my family's gameplay quite significantly are Sagrada and Azul, both of which I would put in the light complexity, medium depth category. When I say light complexity, they are more difficult to teach than something like Dude or Happy Salmon, but they're still relatively quick teach. Azul especially is just a few rules. The rule book is like 4 pages. Sagrada is maybe 6 pages. There's a little bit more to teach because you have to teach how the tool cards work. But still, in terms of complexity of gameplay, it's pretty simple. And so I'm inclined to have it in the light category compared to things like Wingspan and Lords of Waterdeep, which I put in the medium complexity. I think Sagrada and Azul both are in the light. If you haven't played either of these games, I think of them as very similar. They are drafting games in which there's a resource and a pool in the middle of the table, and you take turns taking that resource to populate your board. Having done that, you then score points based on how you populated your board. Sagrada in particular is pretty fun. It's gotten a bit more complex with the expansions. They have these personal player boards that add to the complexity of the game. With the Passion expansion that just came out, they have this special window that gets you points, or gets you this kind of wild die that will score things. So there's a variety of different ways that the game gets more complex. But on its base, and the same with the base game of Azul, they are relatively light games with a bit more depth, because you have to sort of be thinking ahead a couple moves. You're weighing your odds about being able to get a particular thing later when you're choosing. So from that perspective, I enjoy those quite a bit. And on to the last category. I actually find this one pretty difficult to populate in the same way that I found heavy complexity, light depth difficult to populate, because often, while complexity and depth aren't necessarily linked, they often are. So a very complex game often is that way to make it very deep. So the games that are at the sort of equinoxes of the cycle, the games that are either heavy complexity, light depth, or in this case, light complexity, heavy depth, are harder to find. But I have two. One of them, in some ways, is a hobby version of a game that the obvious answer here is chess. Chess is not a very complex game. There are 9 different kinds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different kinds of pieces. Once you know how they move, you know all the rules. And then you know the goal. Compared to some of the board games I play, it's not that complicated. But the depth is off the charts. That said, I don't see chess as a hobby game. It's a lifestyle game. And so it's not eligible for naming in this category. I would, however, name its sort of hobby board game sibling, the Dice Tower Essentials game Onitama. If you haven't played Onitama, it's actually much lighter than chess in terms of complexity. You have 5 pieces on your board, 4 pawns and a king. You have a little spot on the board. And if your king is captured, you lose. Or if your opponent manages to get one of their pieces onto your throne, you lose. And the same goes for you. If you capture their king or get a piece onto their throne, you win. Now here's the clever part. The game comes with a bunch of cards that are moves. And you pick 5 of them to use in the game. Each player gets 2, and the 5th one goes in between the 2 players off on the side of the board. On your turn, you pick one of the 2 move cards that you have to use and move your piece. Then you put the move card you just used off on the side of the board, and you take the card that was there. Then your opponent makes one of their moves, puts their card on the side of the board, and takes the one that you just discarded. So anytime you make a move, you're giving that move to your opponent to play in 2 turns, if they want. And the same goes for them. You both can see all 5 moves that are available, so the game becomes incredibly deep because, like chess, there's a high level of planning that goes on to try to figure out what your opponent's going to do and where you're going to move your pieces. But I just explained the entire game to you. I taught it to you, which is more than I've done for some of the other games, although honestly, Dude or Happy Salmon I could teach just as quickly. So from that perspective, I think Onitama really hits the mark of being a light complexity game with heavy depth. The other game I wanted to point to might more fairly be called medium complexity. It depends where you put the weight of secondary instructions. So what I mean by that is this game, Strife it's called. I think the first one is called Strife Legacy Eve of the Eternals, and the second one is something like Steam and Sorcery or something. Strife is the main title. There are two editions. They can be mixed and matched, or you can play them separately. The way this game works, each player has 9 cards. The cards are numbered 1 through 9, and each card has a battle power and a legacy power. On your turn, you're going to play a battle card, then you're going to activate the legacy power, activate the battle power, and then determine who wins the fight. And when you win the fight, you take a location, and that location gets you points. Then you discard the card you played into your legacy pile, and then pick another card. So the reason I call it light complexity is that both players have the same 9 cards. The turn order and rules for taking turns is very simple. I've explained most of the game to you at this point. The place where I might be cheating a little bit is that it takes a bit more understanding to really get how the cards interact, because the battle powers and the legacy powers are sometimes a bit confusing. So if one were to argue that reading all of the powers on the cards and understanding how they interact counts as part of the complexity of the game, then I probably would have to say this game is medium complexity, in the same way that I think Wingspan is. Wingspan, I think, has a bit more complexity in terms of how the board works and how the actions work, but it also has complexity from the cards. I really only count the complexity for the board and actions, and that's the same here. So Strife, the way that you play, it's not very complex, but the way that these card interactions go is incredibly deep. And the secondary element of the way those cards interact is really neat, because you both have the same 9 cards. At the beginning of the round, you each have the same 9 cards, and you're going to pick which one to start with and where to go. So as the game goes along, you can see which cards your opponent has played and which ones they have yet to play. Now when the hand runs down, I can't remember, it's been a while since I played it, if it's 2 or 1 cards left, then there's a reset where you get all the cards back except the last one you played, and then you start again. And I think you do that 3 times, and the person who has the most points at the end of the 3rd round wins. So Strife is a really interesting dueling game, and one that I consistently hold in my head as being really interesting, even if I don't play it very often. I think it fits the light complexity category because, like I said, the rule set for how you play is pretty simple and easily taught. The complexity of how the cards interact, however, challenges the reader, I would say challenges the player in terms of depth. That recognizing and understanding the plays, setting yourself up by playing 1 card now to play another card in the next round, to play another card in the 3rd round, and have that 3rd round trigger because you played this in the 1st round, and then have that affect something else they did on the 2nd round. It's extremely deep and very satisfying for a game that really started out as a pretty simple thing. Hence, light complexity, heavy depth. Well, that's the end of my 3rd episode on this subject. Hopefully you've enjoyed what amounts to a week of episodes of Pick Up and Deliver, focusing on depth and complexity. I hope that you have been thinking about what games you have. I'm keen to see what's your chart. Say we're going to make a chart of the 9 positions. I will, as of this episode, I will post the complete chart of my 9 positions on the Board Game Geek forum. And I'm keen to see which games do you put in your chart, both of games you like and sort of where you imagine this idea. I'm also curious, do you think that these are the right words for this phenomenon? Do you think complexity is the right word for lots of rules that you have to think about, and the number of things in the system. Do you think depth is the right word for the coordination you have to do between the different, the consideration of the variety of things going on in the game? Pop over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know. And I look forward to talking to you next time. Until then, your next walk was as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.